So I've come to a different part of the rectory garden where we also have bluebells. This is usually a rather dark corner of the rectory garden. It reminds me of Eeyore's gloomy place, rather boggy and sad. And I think that being in a sad and gloomy place, that's very much what was happening to those two disciples on the road to Emmaus. They were thinking about Jesus. They were thinking about the chief priests and the leaders of the people who'd handed him over to be condemned to death, to be crucified and to die. And they were thinking about how that most terrible death had really put pay to the wonderful hope that they had, that he was the one to redeem Israel. So we're in a very sad place, a very gloomy place, a very dark place. But the point is, they were on a journey. So let's journey. And they were going from Jerusalem to Emmaus. It's about 7 miles, and they set off, and as they're going, Jesus comes and joins them, and he walks with them. But the extraordinary thing is they don't recognise that it's Jesus. They just think that it's a stranger. Anyway, he listens to them. He hears all their sadness, all their disappointment. But then he starts to chastise them and say, how foolish you are, how slow you are to believe all that's written in the prophets about the Messiah. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer and should die before he goes into his glory? And starting with Moses and all the scriptures, they go through the scriptures, and Jesus explains to them everything that's written about the Messiah and how it's all fulfilled in him. So the journey goes on, and the two disciples are comforted by this stranger, and they start to feel peace and renewal from him. And as they approach the place where they're going, they say to him, stay with us, it's nearly evening, you don't want to go on, stay with us in this place. And Jesus agrees. And as they sit down to supper, Jesus takes the bread, and he blesses the bread, and he breaks the bread, and he shares the bread with them. And suddenly their eyes are opened, and they recognise and they realise this is Jesus. This is the risen Lord. The Lord is risen indeed. And suddenly they're in a completely different place. They're in the light of the resurrection. They know that the Lord is risen. They have that joy, that peace, that ardour, that energy that comes from the risen Lord. And we hear that they immediately, well, that same hour it says, I imagine they finished their meal, but they go back to Jerusalem to meet the other disciples and share their story with them. And they arrive with those disciples, and the disciples say to him, it's true, the Lord really is risen. He's appeared to Peter. And they tell their story. And they tell about everything that happened on the road and how Jesus was made known to them in the breaking of the bread. But I think the point for us is that we too are on a journey. Our life is a journey. So let's journey on. And a bit like for those disciples, the thing that really makes the difference is the presence of the risen Lord, the presence of the risen Jesus. He's the one who changes everything. He's the one who transforms everything. He's the one who takes us from the rather dark and gloomy places and brings us to the light of the glory of his resurrection, the light of eternal life in him. And the strange thing is that this happens whether we recognise the presence of Jesus or not. Those disciples didn't recognise Jesus, but still their hearts burnt within them. Still they felt comforted and reassured. Still that presence of Jesus changed everything. So let's seek out that presence of Jesus, whether it seems to us we find it or not. Let's seek it out in the scriptures by reading the Bible. Let's seek out his presence in the church and in the sacraments that the church offers. Let's seek out his presence by trying to love one another, and especially loving the least, as Jesus says. Whatever you do to the least of these brothers of mine, you do to me. Let's search him out like that. And as we find Jesus, as we come to the light of that glorious resurrection life of Jesus, so we'll be transformed. So we'll come to share in that resurrection life of Jesus. So we'll come to share in the confidence of eternal life with him. So we've arrived back at our Paschal candle. It's the symbol of the resurrection life of Christ in his church. And we've got a new one for 2020 here. and that light of the resurrection of Jesus shines out and is a symbol of the resurrection of life of Jesus in the church. So let's dwell in that light. Let's be transformed by that presence of the risen Lord, and let's finally come to him with resurrection life and eternal life in him. Amen. So now we're going to sing our hymn, Good Christians all, rejoice and sing.